to be honest, I'm probably leaning on that trigger a little harder than I should be. So I ended up getting him right in the shoulder. Well, when I shoot, he stumbles up the hill, and my old man's left-handed, so he's to our right, so it's perfect for him. Now the buck is totally out of the way for me. So I'm jacking another shell in the pump, and the old man lets one loose, and I get to watch the steam and all the water droplets come off the deer.
No kidding.
It was just like an explosion of mist, you know.
Welcome back to another episode of Northwoods Whitetails Podcast. I'm sitting here in Stowe, Vermont with Nick Campagna, Joey Davis, and John Moulton. How you doing, boys?
Good.
How do you do on the last name? Did he hammer it?
He did all right.
There's a little butcher there.
Better than off the air.
Yeah. I never knew how to say your name.
That's okay.
It's a tough one, but we got it.
Yeah.
So you want to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I've been hunting since I was a little kid. Started out, mostly following my dad around in the Adirondacks. He always hunted the Adirondacks when I was young. And a lot of people don't know, but you can't hunt there as a non-resident till you're 16, I think. They might have changed it now. But so I had a lot of miles just following Dad around in the woods. And those are big mountains over there. We got a camp, and there was a lot of deer when I was a kid. There was, a lot of 3.5-year-old bucks and a lot of 4.5, 5.5-year-old bucks too. But everybody could pretty much shoot a decent buck every year. So I kind of got thrown to the wolves. And I had a chance to go with all my dad's hunting partners. They would sort of give my dad a break and let him go on his own, and I'd get to go with them. So it was almost like training camp every year until I could go. And then finally, when I was able to go, I was playing football in high school, so missed a lot of Saturday mornings and Saturdays. And
right.
Finally, I think it was the third weekend of the first year I hunted, we got a little snow, and I got lucky and tracked down a 4-pointer, and that was the first. I had shot a little button buck youth weekend in Vermont, but I was able to track that little 4-pointer down, and I wrote an article for the Maine Sportsman there last year, the year before. It was called When It Clicks, or When Everything Clicks, and that was when it happened for me. It was like all this time I've been with the old man, with his buddies, paying attention, and they shot some deer when I was with them, and I got that 4-pointer, and it was on from there. Every year I hunted the Adirondacks, I shot a buck.
Really?
And then I stopped. I mean, I wasn't picky.
Right.
The 4-pointer was the smallest one, but I wasn't. Yep. I mean, there was just an astronomical amount of 2.5-year-old basket rack bucks. And then I ended up, because of the Benoits and Hal Blood and all these other people, the Berniers, I reading all these books, and I was like, I got to go to Maine. I got to go to New Hampshire. And I ended up in New Hampshire. Just because Maine, I was a weekend warrior, and you couldn't hunt Sunday. So I've been kind of bouncing around New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine. The last couple of years, I've been able to hunt Maine more because I've been just hunting during the week and just
a little more flexible with your time.
Making it a priority. Yep. I'm self-employed now, so I'm going to do what I want.
Right. That's the dream, isn't it?
Yep.
For a deer hunter?
Yeah. That's the way it should be.
Yeah.
And of course, I guide moose hunters now too. So, or I say now, it's been 10 years or something, but, so
in
it puts
Maine?
me in Maine, in Vermont. I just haven't gotten a New Hampshire guide license, and there's so few tags, it's not worth it. So,
right.
Plus with the seasons, it's like they overlap anyways. So Maine really makes sense. I did like 4 hunts in a row 2 years ago, and that was too much. But it's worked out really well. I'm basically in the woods for a month before deer season starts. So you kind of get your legs under you, and
you're sharp.
Yeah.
When it's time to go.
it's a lot of fun. So
You guided a big name last year. Who's
did.
son?
Yeah, we had a ton of fun. There was a lot of jokes in camp about it before, they showed up. And, you never know. You see these guys on TV and you never know, like, are they going to be real hunters? Are they going to be, like, point me to the animal and let me shoot it? And he was legit. The camera guys were not. They were whitetail hunters through and through. They were not totally excited about hiking through some of the stuff that I hiked them through, but we had a good week. We passed up bulls that the other hunters in camp all would have shot. They got some wicked footage. I think it's going to be out soon.
Who was it?
Greg Ritz.
Okay.
Hunt Masters TV.
Okay. Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah, I called in like he was probably a 200-inch bull. And I was the only one that could see him. The wind just kind of bit us, but he wouldn't leave the cow. And we were walking through this bog, and to the right of us, there was like a lane where all the spruce was dead and it was kind of wet, and everything's green there, whether it's fir or spruce, whatever. And there was alders on the left side of the trail, and we got about halfway across this thing, and I'm like, I know there's a bull here. There was a huge track in the mud, tons of tracks, but there was one that was just rounded right off, like, they say pie plate, but they're not really that big. And so I was cow calling, and I told those guys, I said, you just stand right there. I'm going to go over here for a second. And I walked over and started smashing the alders. And it's not super common, but it happens every once in a while. I'm smashing the alders, and a cow answered me. And I'm like, well, if she answered me, there's a bull right there. So I cow called, and I raked. No bull, no cow, nothing. And I told those guys, I said, you're going to just wait right there. I said, I'm going to go down the edge of this bog and just start smashing stuff. And I did. I was literally pulling over like 4-inch dead spruce, just grabbing them and pulling them and taking I carry an antler. I carry a shed. And I was just swinging it as hard as I could like a baseball bat and just smashing it on trees. And pretty soon, all you could hear was antlers. And it was so thick and he was so big, he was just pushing right through. And I thought he was raking at first, so I stopped and listened. And I'm like, oh, he's coming. And you could hear him like mad. Not just like he's excited because there's a cow, but like a pissed off grunt. So I'm like, perfect. So I come back towards them down the bog, and he's almost coming like right at me. And the wind was kind of squirrely. And so I kind of crouched down behind some stuff there, and hindsight's 20/20, but the wind shifted and it was right at him. And I'm like, of course, the wind being right at him is also parallel to the road. So, the bull's coming at me, but he's going to be a perfect broadside shot for these guys. And he gets right to the edge of that thing and he stops, and I can just see his fronts. And, he's got like Yukon looking fronts on him, just big palmated fronts. And I can see just the top of his palms. And I'm like, man, 2 steps. If he takes 2 steps, he's done. And what I didn't know at the time is they can see him. Like a regular hunter, he's dead. But in the camera, it's dark. And so they're, all right, we're waiting. And he stood there and stood there and stood there. And I just took my antler and I just leaned it out a little bit. And he saw it. And he put his head down and he started to come out. And as soon as his rack got all the way out in the open, that wind hit him. And he just, boom, switched. And, I mean, you could hear him for a half mile running.
No kidding.
I was like,
wow.
So did they get him on film?
I think they got him in the
Close.
dark. You know what I mean? Like, you can't.
Huh.
It was.
That'd have been something to kill.
It was a shame, but. And they had that bull on camera, the guys I was working for, 2 years ago. I think I'm going to get screwed up now, but whatever. Before that. And then it's kind of most hunters aren't going to go in there. Most, how do I say this nice?
Average?
Most Mainers, the resident Mainers,
right.
That's not going to be where they're going to go to kill a bull. A lot of people are not into packing them a couple miles and all that. So we had it to ourselves. There was nobody in there. And those guys decided not to put cameras just because most guys don't usually want to go there. And last year it was tough. They had like 40 cameras out and they had 2 bulls over 50 inches. And I'm like, we got to find something bigger. Like, I can't be hunting, 2 50-inch bulls. And so we were running around, going to all these places, and when we went in there, they're like, well, there was a huge one there a couple of years ago, but no cameras. And I'm like, well, we're going to go check it. And we went in there, and there was moose tracks everywhere. I think I called 2 bulls in there that we passed up. One of them was like, I don't know, from me to Brooke. And they're hiding behind an alder, and he comes out, and he's raking an alder. And, of course, they get everything in slow-mo. They get this camera that they shoot TV commercials with. We watched the footage back. It was insane. You know, you can see the spit coming out of his mouth when he's grunting. I'm like,
that's cool.
It's probably like a $20,000 camera.
I think so, yeah. Yeah, the guy said he did like Ford truck commercials and stuff. And,
that's awesome.
but they were laughing because they said they had the little Rode wireless mics.
Yep.
And they're like, we can hear your heartbeat and Greg's heartbeat in the mic. And I'm like, well, yeah. I was like, you guys must be pumped too. And they're like, no. They're just whitetail guys.
Really?
One's from Illinois, one's from Kansas. The one guy killed a 190-something-inch deer in Illinois, and he was like, yeah. They were talking about how, like, maybe you should have let him go because he was like 4.5. And I'm
190.
Like, you guys are nuts. You know, like, you crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But
they just don't know.
They don't know.
Yep, that's exactly it.
But, yeah, we had a blast. We shot grouse, and I think they did couple ads, a little commercial, whatever, for Outdoor Edge. And
I remember seeing the stories, and they were. Of course, everything that Greg does is super high-end stuff, production-wise. Yeah. No, I remember him shooting a partridge or something, cooking up. He was cooking it up, I think, in the frying pan.
Yeah, he was a super nice guy. You know, he's a good hunter. I think he's like an Olympic skeet shooter or something.
Okay.
He used to shoot. I know he did competition. I thought it was Olympic, but yeah, he was, because I told him that I got a cheap 12 gauge that I leave in the truck, single shot, and I'm like, you might get him, you might not. Like, it's not that good of a gun, you know?
Yeah.
And he never missed.
No kidding.
I'm like, all right, well, he's better than me with that thing, but
yeah. Huh.
Yeah, we had a good time, and he's like, I want to cook this up and use the Outdoor Edge, and he's like, can everybody kind of, and we're like, yeah, sure, we'll wait till there's nobody at camp, and we had a blast. They laughed that I was carrying an antler around. Yeah. And then when the bull came into 5, the bull's 5 yards from them, and he's 15 from me, and I'm holding an antler up, and they're like, yeah, that works.
Yeah.
And one morning I called in. He probably would have been high 40s, maybe mid 40s, but one antler was broke right off, and he came forever up out of this bog, and the sun was just coming up, so all the steam was coming off this. The beavers had dammed up the road. I killed a bull there in 2018 or something, and I'm like, that's pretty good in there. It's a couple miles, but we'll walk in. This bull comes up out, and I'm literally sitting on the beaver dam. The water's behind me, and they're over here. I'm like, they're going to have a perfect shot. And he come right up, and the grass was so tall, I just stuck that antler up in the air. I mean, just a steam coming out of him when he would grunt. It was wicked. Of course, they got good footage of that, too. And I got in a grunting fit with him. Eventually, he came up, and I'm like, well, he's standing on our tracks. I was like, I got to do something good for TV. So I just stand up, and I'm like, and he turned and looked, and he grunted at me, and I'm holding the antler up. We went back and forth for, 6 or 7 grunts, and
that's awesome.
He ended up trotting off, but yeah, we had a good time.
So he didn't end up killing one, but is he coming back? Do you know?
So we were talking about it, and he was planning on it, but then the whole COVID thing ended, and I think, for the money, I think he's going to go back to Yukon or.
Yeah.
He showed me the bull that he shot up there. They had a clip of it in slow-mo, and because I don't watch any of those TV shows, and I think he was a little offended. I'd never seen his show, but
I've never seen it either.
No, you never have.
They do it really good.
Yeah, it's top-notch quality.
It's like I don't know how to explain it. Like I don't want to like trash talk, but it's like it's.
Is it like a National Geographic type level?
No, it's not like a normal hunting show. It's very produced.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like if they have to get a bunch of B-roll after to make sure they have all the shots to line it up, and it's not like you're doing anything different than what you did, but they would video me a lot after calling and raking just to be like, all right, we have the good audio from the first time, now we have it again, and just to make sure they have everything they need.
Yeah.
So
Gotcha. It sounds like a lot of fun. I've never been on a moose hunt.
You got to do it.
Yeah. But being in southern Vermont, in my life, I don't think, maybe when I was a little kid, they gave tags out for way down in the southern part, but
yeah, they used to back in
just
the day.
not a lot. Like it was, you know. And then how many tags does Vermont give now?
I think they doubled it this year. It's like 180 or something.
This year
and it's
give 180.
mostly Northeast Kingdom, right?
Just
Northeast Kingdom.
Just E1 and E2.
And it's kind of comical because everybody that hunted last year, like I talked to Jeremy Valentine, I think it was his dad that he was hunting, had a cow permit. And he's like, man, there was people everywhere.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, imagine what it was like when there was 1,000 tags right there.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, but the state record came from down by you.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
And supposedly
Beautiful.
there was another one. Supposedly there was two the same size right there, and he just shot the first one.
I've got pictures of one in that area that I've showed you guys. It's
Right.
it's a big bull.
Yeah.
I mean, they're there.
One of the state records, or maybe it's number 2. Correct me if I'm wrong. Shed antler wise is from down that way too.
I think it's
Yeah, I'm sure.
It's like 82 inches.
82, I think, is Bloomfield bull.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that 81, I think it's from Addison County. So
Yeah.
it's like Granville or
Yeah.
something. And
Yeah.
I don't,
That's a big antler.
yeah, I wouldn't,
Yeah.
I don't think I'd spend too much time looking there, but
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I just wish they'd give a few tags out for every. Give one out for every zone. You know, just a couple. Like there's bulls in every zone. I bet maybe not. Maybe a few. Like there isn't, but
it's the antis, I think. It's, they want to see moose. So they're like, all right, we probably shouldn't shoot.
I mean, all the way down the Green Mountain Spine, there's moose. I mean, there's
yeah.
moose in Connecticut. I've seen sign of them down there scouting around just this spring.
Well, you guys have hunted mass, right? I
Yeah.
hear there's a ton of them by the Quabbin, and
There is.
yeah.
Yeah, where I killed that buck last year, there was at least 2 bulls, and I think the third one was a bull.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I hunted down by the Quabbin one time. There's like a 1,000-acre piece that you don't have to draw a tag on, and there was moose hookings all over that thing. But it's like, it looks like Maine around there. It's all like spruce swamps and cuts, but
They're just Vermont moose that have migrated pretty much.
yeah.
I mean,
maybe,
you think about
yeah.
the Adirondacks, they got there because they either went through Canada or they went across Lake Champlain. I mean, they swim Lake Champlain all the time.
That's
There's one there a
crazy.
couple of years ago that died.
Really?
Yeah.
Went across the lake and people were like, oh, moose, pushed it back in the lake.
Oh
and
my
then
gosh.
Under.
Drowned.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But-
I think there was one there in Shelburne, I think, by Shelburne Bay that was like, it got on the point because of the people, and it was like, there's a ledge. So he's just standing on the shale. And they get all the wardens there and state police. I'm like, if you guys just leave,
Yeah.
he'll just,
He'll leave.
he'll leave. But
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some buck killing.
Yeah, sure.
You had a pretty good year last year. You shot a couple buck.
yeah, pretty good. It's funny that the first one there, that New Hampshire buck, I got duped pretty hard. I got cut off, and I was like, well, I should probably go check this other spur if nobody's been on it. I wasn't on the other one for very long at all. Got cut off, and he was going up. Usually that's a good sign, but he turned, and there was a road, and I'm like, crap. So I come down, and I go up the next one, and it was snowing like crazy. It was when we got that really good snow. And I'm driving up the road, and I look at the track, and he's like cross-country skiing, going across the road, going up into this winter beach, and there's no snow in it. And it's snowing like crazy. And I'm like, all right, he just heard me pull up here. So I pulled up the road, got out, loaded my gun, took my time, looked at Onyx for like 10 minutes. I'm like, I don't need to go run right in there. So I'm looking at it. I'm like, what's he going to do? I'm like, well, he's going to be above me. There was a really thick winter beach cut down low. I'm like, he's going to go up the edge of that thing, and he's going to turn and go up the spine. I only went like 300 yards. And I was like creep mode the whole time. I'm like, he's right here. And all of a sudden I hear stuff breaking, and I look up, and of course I got the gun up, and this doe runs right down. There's just sticks flying through the air, and she gets to like 20 yards, turns 90, and bails over the bank. And I'm like, all right, well, hopefully he stops right there. And he runs down and he stops, and I can just see the frame, and I'm like, well, it's not that big, but like it's a rack. It's not like a 4-pointer or something. And in my head, I'm like, well, I got a New Hampshire tag, a Vermont tag. I can go to the Adirondacks. I got Maine. I'm like, all right. So I shoot and hit him, obviously, I would hope, at 20 yards. And he runs by, and I shoot again. And I got down there. I'm like, man, he's not as big as that track looked. I thought it was going to be like, 190, 200. And he was like I don't remember, mid 170s or something. And I'm like, all right, well, that's cool. I only got like a 300-yard drag. So I dragged him down, went and weighed him in, started driving around in Maine looking for buck tracks. Saw a bunch of familiar vehicles. And one of them ended up shooting a great big 8-pointer a couple of days later.
Yeah.
So I go back and hang it up, and Timmy and the guys get to camp there, and they're like, oh, I guess you're not holding out, huh? And I'm like, oh, I was gonna, but it happens. And we were gonna film each other. Timmy and I were gonna, because we're both like, camera guy. Do I want a camera guy that doesn't know anything about deer hunting? So we were gonna film each other. Well, his cousin had come up, and he wants to learn tracking a little better. So he's like, he's just gonna go with me. And I'm like, all right, cool. So I was like, I think I'm going to go down here where I scouted in the rain. And he's like, well, you should go check this place out first. He goes, just go hike in there. And he goes, there was a couple good ones in there last year. And he kind of gave me a little shit. You know, he was like, don't, like, find a big one. Like, don't just, you know, because he's like, that's the problem. If you follow one that's 180, you're probably going to shoot it. Yeah, he's like, you're probably going to shoot it. He goes, if you follow one that's 220, if you catch up to him, same deal. I'm like, all right. So I walk in there. There's no deer tracks at all. I turn up the first spur into this basin, and like a 200-pound track comes across the trail and goes down. And I'm like, look at Onyx. I'm like, well, it's kind of yucky down there. And he's only like, 190 maybe to 210. He's not real wide-chested. He's pretty long. I'm like, he's probably not that old. His chest's not that big, but he's long deer. I'm like, no, I'll just keep going. Maybe I'll find a bigger one. And I get up there, and they had bred the night before. All of a sudden, there's deer tracks everywhere. There's little drops of blood. Every little alder pinch area is just tore to crap, and there's deer tracks going everywhere. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to keep going down the road, see if one of them crosses solo. And so I go down, cross a little brook. It goes up, and it teed, and none of them came out. So I'm like, well, I'll go on this knob over here. So I make a huge loop. I see two does, like 120 yards away on this open face. It's all cut. And I'm like, come on. Like, where are you? There's got to be a buck here. Nothing. Make a loop all the way around that. No buck track coming out. And I'm like totally baffled. I'm like, how did they do that? So I go back down to where they had bred, and I walk back down to the tee, and I take a right, and I go the other way. And there's a couple buck tracks crossing, but there's just so many deer tracks I couldn't really tell. So I'm like, all right. I go out there like a half mile, and I swing up on the side of that ridge, which is the bigger mountain. There's nothing going up. I'm like, okay, did I walk right by them? So I loop around. So now I've like done 3 parts of a clover leaf, if it was a 4-leaf clover. And I get back down, and I'm like, all right, well, that road kind of paralleled this brook, and there's a really old skid trail on the other side of the brook. So I walk down that. Now it's like noon. I'm walking down that, and there's like 180-ish, 190 maybe buck track. And I'm like, well, that's not even as big as the one I passed up, but it's steaming fresh. And I'm like, well, they were in by the brook. And I go like 30 yards, and there's a steaming fresh doe, and there's 2 buck tracks that are both right there, 200, And one of them definitely, he had a bigger chest. I'm like, all right, that's the one. So I get in there, and of course, it's warmed up. The sun's out. The thing is as crisp as it can be, soft. I get in there, and the moose had been everywhere in there the night before, and I can see it was bulls, and they were kind of dinking around, playing, and all their tracks are froze solid. So the deer had stepped in them, and I'm like trying to step where it's soft. And I go probably, I don't know, a half mile, and I hear something, and it was just starting to get thicker. They had kind of thinned that first part out, and right where it was getting thicker, there was a lot of fur and stuff. And I hear something, and it was real windy, and I'm like, what the heck was that? And I'm standing there, and I hear it again, and I'm like, that's antlers. And I'm like, those bulls are right here. And so I sneak up, and I just kind of like looking around the corner of this thick stuff, and I see these 3 bulls. They're like walking down the trail to me, and they're like butting heads while they're coming down the trail. So I'm standing there, and I watch them, and they go by, and I go like 15 yards, and there's a buck bed. You could see where he laid down. He went up, laid down, got up, walked like 10 feet over, stood, looked out where the bulls were, then turned and walked around them. And I was like, okay, well, he's right
here.
here. And the whole time there's another buck track that's just kind of in there. So I'm like, well, there's a good one, and then there's a satellite buck. So same thing, it's thick, it's a lot of fur, and it just kept getting thicker and thicker and thicker. And the ground is soft, but it's like where the moose stepped is frozen, and I'm like, there's no way. But the wind was whipping, so I would just wait till it was really windy to make these kind of critical moves. And they went through a spot where I've like totally covered my rifle. I'm bent over. I got snows falling down on top of me, and I'm just like weaving through it. And all of a sudden it popped out, and I'm standing there, and I see a deer. It's only like 15 or 20 yards of semi-open. It's all like soft maple. The moose have chewed the shit out of it, and I see this shadow coming right at me. So I pull up, and he walks right out in the open, and I just see a rack behind the fur, and I'm like, well, that's a pretty good buck. So I put it where I thought his neck. I couldn't even see his neck. I could see his face and his antlers, and I'm like, well, his neck's got to be like right there. Doosh! And he just went right out of sight. And I'm like, sweet. He was like 20 yards away. Wow. 2 days in a row, the buck came back to me, which is never happened.
You were right in their wheelhouse.
Yeah, so I walked up to him, and we had a little video there. You can't see it now, but we had a little video made up, and you can see I'm like, all right, I should probably walk over there. And I go over, and the first thing I did when I went over, I leaned the gun up, and I like looked at his track, and I'm like, that's not even either one of the tracks that I was following. You'd have never followed that track. He was 217, but he had little tiny feet.
No kidding.
Like you'd have never. My mind was blown. So I'm like, there's 2 more bucks right here that are probably bigger. And I only had him pegged at like 195 or 200 maybe in the woods, but but he had a brow tine and a G3 broken off, and they were both like still white.
So he just
broke him.
That blood that you came across and everything tore to shit was probably him and another one.
Yeah, I'm assuming there's a piece of an antler laying there somewhere. I should have brought Ruger there this spring, but
no kidding.
That's
cool.
That's
a good story.
So you're going back in the same spot this fall then.
So the funny part, for some reason, I had a really cheap little trail camera with me the day that I shot that buck. And when I came back to where they had bred, like the 3rd time, I was like, I should get rid of this camera. So it's still there right now.
Nice.
Okay.
I stuck it there and never went back to it. So I'll go this fall and
like you set it up.
Yeah, there's probably like 47,000 pictures of grass and stuff right now, but whatever.
Or a bear.
You didn't go back and try and find those antlers, those bulls that were.
They were like 40-inch bulls, so I was like, oh, it's kind of. I've got an idea probably where they go, but where they were, there's some fur and it's chewed up, but it's like November.
Yeah,
it's not. I think they're gonna move out of there probably, but
not antler.
And I didn't find any old ones, so you might have picked them up already. But somebody, if there was any, they got picked up. I think because that one little section, there was some old trees that were rubbed. I'm guessing it was like a staging area, but
no kidding.
There was. I go weigh the deer in. It was like 2 miles, I think, to drag. So I dragged it out by myself, went and weighed it in. Got it to camp. Timmy's like, you got to be kidding me, really? Like 2 days in a row? I'm like, yeah, when you're on, you're on. And then I videoed him, and I was like, man, I should have gone to the Adirondacks or something.
Right.
You've done that multiple times, though, where you've...
Yeah, when you get on it, you're just, you got to go.
You've shot some bucks back-to-back in different states. Couple different times.
When the conditions are right,
Yeah, well, that's what it is. If you get the good snow and it stays good, it doesn't warm up and then freeze. And
it's just getting
you got to go when it's good.
And you got to go.
Yeah.
And plus, I can't hold out for a 210, 220.
That's all right.
You know what I mean? So
217 is pretty close. So.
Yeah, well.
I don't think you're going to pass that up.
No.
But, like I said, totally duped, though. Had no idea.
Right.
It was odd. I was scratching my head. I was like, man. And, the other thing, too, I've talked about this with a lot of guys, especially when we talk about the Adirondacks. 170, 180-pound deer in the Adirondacks is a big-bodied buck, and he might have 160, 150, 160 set of antlers,
So, we've talked about that before. It's all relative to where you're hunting. So.
Yeah.
That's right.
The only one personally that I've got that had both was that one I got in New Hampshire.
That
He had both.
you need to talk about that.
Yeah, I'd love. That's what I wanted to ask you about that story because
That buck is like
for people who don't know,
that. Yeah, that. What did he score, Nick?
Net or
What
when he was dry, he was 158 or something, and
gross though?
yeah.
Yeah. He was. I would say he's probably still one of the biggest bucks to come out of that region. Since you killed him.
I know there's another one that looks just like him because they were feeding it in town.
Yep.
But
Yep,
I kind of checked around after we got him, like looked at pictures from previous years, and I never saw one of that buck in town. So I don't know if he just stayed or what the deal was. But the next year I didn't even hunt there. I don't know why. I just was like, I had something else in my mind. I was like, I'm going to go to this other place. And then the following year after that, I go in there, and there wasn't really that many people. Like, I never really saw people there too much. And I drive up there, and I'm like, man, it looks like somebody drove in here and didn't drive out of here. And I get up there, and Justin's loading his gun, and I was like, yeah, he knows. Like, all right. But
that was tell a little bit about that story.
Tell the
that
whole
big
thing.
one. Tell
the whole thing.
The whole thing.
Okay.
You were with your dad, right? Like that
Yeah.
makes it bittersweet.
Oh, it was, yeah, it couldn't have been better. So the last time we really had double teamed, we got to like go back to Adirondack days. I think it was maybe like 2 years before I could hunt the Adirondacks, maybe 3 years. I'm going to tell a part of this story that he probably wouldn't like me to tell, but I'm going to tell it. We hike out this road. I'm just a little kid. We hike out this road, and I could go anywhere pretty much, even when I was that young. And we're trucking. There's like 1.5 inches of snow. Not much, but it's like it just fell. It's soft, and we're hammering. And all of a sudden, like, 2.5-year-old buck track and a doe. And Dad's like, all right, let's go. And this old road that we used to hike out, it went to a spring. It was a road, but there was no logging in there. It was just an old road that went out, and there was a spring at the end of it. It was almost impossible to find, but there was 3 brooks. So, like, when we would talk about it at camp, we're like, oh, was it by the second brook or the third brook? And so we were, like, out by the second brook. These deer come across, and we follow them up. They cross the brook up in there, and they start going, and we bump them. And we didn't go probably 100 yards, and a nice buck track came across, and Dad's like, well, we're going to switch to that. He goes, it's fresh, and they're running. They know we're here. This guy's bigger anyway. So I'm like, all right, cool. He crosses the third brook, starts heading towards the mountain. And when you get up in there, it's nice. The Adirondacks, there's some places where you can shoot. And, I could tell even then that my dad was pretty excited for where this buck's going, the time of the day that it is. It's like 10 o'clock. He's like, all right. And he stops, and he's like, I gotta go pee real quick. He's like, hold my gun. And I'm like, okay. He was like, if you see him, shoot him. And I was like, I don't know if you're kidding or not, but I'm like, I'm ready, And he had a .358 Winchester, so it probably would have barked a little bit for me. But anyways, he gets done and give him his gun back. And we go like 100 yards, and he's like, right there. And I'm like, I freeze, right? A little kid, I'm like, what do I do? And I just freeze, and I got one foot like up in the air, and I'm balancing, and I sort of start to tip over. I like put a hand on the ground, and I can see the buck just like it was like you were watching a Benoit video. The buck's just walking at the top of the basin, totally broadside, no idea we're there. And the sun is just kind of peering up over the knob there, and Dad pulls up. Boom! Buck runs like 30 yards, stops, boom, and he flops. Well, the second shot, when he pulled up, the sun was right in the scope. So when he shot, he hit it right in the leg. And the first shot had already gone through the lungs. So when he hit it in the leg, it just tipped over, and that was it. So we walk up, and we're high-fiving and hugging, and we hadn't even started taking pictures yet, and we hear, how'd you do that? And we turn around, and one of the other guys had hiked out this other road, and he was dropping in that way, and he didn't even hear the shooting. He was right on the other side of the knob, never even heard the shooting.
No kidding.
And we were like, you couldn't have been 200 yards away. So anyways, we got help dragging out and everything, and that was the last time that we had double teamed. And then you fast forward to 2017, the day before we got that buck, it was the same 3 guys, me and my dad and his friend Howard. We all went basically to the same area. We dropped Howard off, and Dad and I both took separate ridges. And I passed up a little 8-pointer in his bed that day. And I was kind of like, I shouldn't have done that, but it was almost like it was not too easy, but it was too easy to pass him up because he was laying in his bed, and I pulled up, and I'm like,
felt guilty in a way or something.
No, it was just like, I know that I'm not going to be that happy. I'm like,
Right.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm trying to pass deer. And then that night I was like, what an idiot. I'm like, it was probably like 180-pound deer, 170, you know?
Yeah.
And I was like, I would have been plenty happy, but like, you know, you're trying to shoot stuff with bigger racks, and I'm like, whatever. And the next day we wake up and it's raining. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And there's no snow at camp. Like, well, we know where we're going, where there's going to be some. I was like, Dad, what are you doing? He's like, I'll just ride with you. And I'm like, all right. And it's miserable out, and there's nobody. It's like a ghost town. There's nobody out. We pull into the first road. There's not one fresh truck track, and there's like a 180-pound buck has crossed with a doe, and he's like dinking around in by the river, and he's just kind of, I'm like, no. I just looked at the old man, and I'm like, you want to follow that? And he was like, not really. And I'm like, yeah, me neither. We hadn't even decided, like, we didn't know we were going to double team. And so we keep driving, and there's a giant track, but he comes out of a swamp and goes into a swamp. And I've been in there, and I'm like, we don't really want to go in there. I was like, we'll drive to the end of the road, and if we don't find anything else, I'll drop you off on the other side, and then I'll go in over here, and hopefully he comes out. And he's like, yeah, that's a good plan. We keep driving. We start going up the mountain, and the road kind of goes up, and then it bangs a left. There's a big culvert with a brook there, and then it bangs another right. And right there, the buck had come up the other side of the brook, crossed on the road to get across the brook, and then went back in the woods. And I knew before we even drove up on it, I'm like, that's a big one. And we drove up, and I can see one toe's like a half inch shorter than the other, and he's like wicked staggered going across the road. I'm like, let's go. I was like, you just going to go with me? Like, he's like, yeah, why not? I mean, pouring rain.
You had snow, though.
Had snow.
Yeah.
Probably 1.5 inches, maybe.
Yeah.
So we drive up like 50 yards. I back in, park, and we take off. And that buck never walked through anything thick the entire time. He walked moose trails. He was like, go over here and check a doe track, and then go back, get back on the moose trail and keep going. And he got up on this bench, and I thought we were going to see him because it kind of, you know, it came up and there was like rocks and stuff, and I was like, he's going to lay right here. And got up there, and he wasn't there, and he went over, and there was a trail going up through. I say it was moose trail, but deer obviously use it. And there was like a 6-inch spruce, and his tracks were so far from that tree where he stood to rub it. I was like, he's got a big rack and a long neck if he can reach that tree from there.
Sure.
And so with, you know, the hearts are pounding now. We're like that. Like, he's got a set of antlers. Yeah. And we go up on the next bench, and it got a little thicker, and there's a deer trail just, you know, looked like the long trail, just deer tracks going back and forth, and there's another giant track in there, probably the buck that was in the swamp, I'm guessing, a couple hours later. So we're kind of messing around, trying to figure out where he went, and then we notice a track on the bank with the shorter toe, so that saved us some time. We're like, well, that's him right there. He left all those deer. He zigzagged around right there just a little bit, probably 30 yards. He kind of messed around. And he went up on the spine, and then he turned, and there's a big moose trail going right down the spine of the mountain. All the fur's all chewed off from the moose. There's rubs, and he's just going down that spine, and all of a sudden there's all these blowdown, and I'm like, I had a bad feeling. As soon as I saw it, I'm like, he was laying right there. And we get up there, sure enough, there's a bed, and your heart kind of sinks a little. And then I see the track leaving it is just walking.
There you go.
And I'm like, oh, man. And the wind is like totally sideways. You know, it's just 90 to him. And it got really tight, and I could see it was going to open up. So I bet it took 10 minutes to go 50 yards. And I'm just like looking for him. And right when we get to that opening, I'm standing there. And I'm like, where did he go? I can see he kind of messed around. Well, he turned, and he went right down the bank. And he went right like through rabbit cover. And he hadn't done that the whole time. Wicked steep, dropped right off, and I'm like, something's going on. Like, I don't know why he went down right there, but there was much better places to go. So we're going down the bank, and it's so steep that I'm in the front, and my dad's in the back, and he's like above me. Like, I'm turning around, I'm almost looking straight up at him. You know, I'm grabbing trees and kind of sliding down. And as soon as I pop out to where I can see, I look over, and we're on a little tiny bench where like bulls would go up in bed and just kind of watch. And there's a doe like 30 yards away looking at me. And so I'm like, all right, that's why he just came down. Where is he? So I'm looking all around, and I heard my old man whisper. He's like, is it a doe? I'm like, yeah, it's a doe right there. I'm kind of looking over the bank, and I hear a grunt. And I'm looking, and it sounded like she grunted. And I look at him, I'm like, did you hear that grunt? And he's like, yeah. And the wind's blowing pretty good, and it just started to like turn into freezing rain, and I'm baffled. I'm like looking over the bank, and the doe's starting to get a little sketched out, but like we're standing in the stuff, you know, thick green. I'm all green, and I can just remember I took a step, and I'm like looking over the bank, and my old man goes, right there. And I turned and looked back towards the doe. Well, he was laying there the whole time, like 15 yards away. So he stands up. He grunted at the doe because she got a little squirrely seeing us. He was clueless. So he stood up, and Dad can just see the rack.
Oh, my God.
And he like, we've talked about it a million times, but he had no idea. He's like, I can see that it's a nice rack, but like, he goes, if the buck would have turned and ran, he goes, I would have told you it was 120 inch deer or something, you know? And so I'm kind of in front of him. So when I see it, I pull up, and the buck starts walking, and there's like one, 8 or 10 inch hole through this blowdown. And I just put my peep sight on that hole, and I just watch his shoulder go through it. And to be honest, I'm probably leaning on that trigger a little harder than I should be. So I ended up getting him right in the shoulder. Well, when I shoot, he stumbles up the hill, and my old man's left-handed, so he's to our right, so it's perfect for him. Now the buck is totally out of the way for me. So I'm jacking another shell in the pump, and the old man lets one loose, and I get to watch the steam and all the water droplets come off the deer.
No kidding.
It was just like an explosion of mist, and he spins around and starts going, and I rip 2 more at him and hit him with another one. And it seems like there's 2 types of guys when a buck's hit. There's like stealth mode, and then there's like run after him. I'm like the run after him, and Dad's like stealth mode. So I just take off. I'm like reloading, putting another clip in the pump, and I get over there, and of course, I was in the military for 11 years, so I like come around that thing like I'm clearing a building, and he's already just legs straight up in the air, antlers buried in the brush, and I'm like, oh,
there he is.
All right, cool. Yeah. And I turn around, and Dad is still back where we shot from.
No kidding.
And I just start laughing. I walk over there and give him a big hug, and we didn't have any idea. I could tell it was a big deer. But we go walking down, and I lay my gun down, and I grabbed him right by his bases, and I pulled the head out, and I'm like wide-eyed. I turn and look at Dad. I'm like, whoa, that's way bigger than I thought it was. And we were there for probably, 30 seconds. We hugged. I yelled, gave a little war whoop, and then we hear this dude yell.
Really?
From down the mountain, and we're like, what the heck? He heard the shooting, and then he heard me yell, and he was coming up. There's a old road on the other side. He was walking up that, and I guess there was a bunch of deer down there. And he comes running up, and I've never seen anybody's face. This guy was just total. It was like somebody took a whiz in his Cheerios, He was like, he's like, I was only, 200-300 yards from that deer,
Yeah.
He's like, I wonder if that's the one I've been tracking. And I'm like, no. I'm like, he just came off the top. And I felt bad, but I'm like, hey, you want to take some pictures of us?
Hey, that worked out.
So we put him to work for a couple minutes, but he didn't help drag, though.
And what'd that buck weigh?
226.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
I thought he was like, we both said that, I think maybe because of the rack, but we both thought he was, super bony. His hips were sticking out and stuff. Everybody, when we waited, everybody was like, that's all that thing weighs? And I'm like,
really long deer.
yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. When we hung it up there at the store where you hang them, The winch was maxed out, and it was only like an inch and a half off the ground. I'm like,
Ooh.
I'm like, whoa. That's when, of course, when you hang them is when they really stretch. You're
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, that's a big deer.
Huh.
And the guy was all mad because he's like, "Can I take your picture with it?" And I was like, "No."
No.
I'm
no,
like, "You can
thanks.
take a picture of it if you want, but not with me in there."
Everybody's gonna know
Yeah,
the
they
direction I came.
they posted it anyways. But
Oh, really? Yeah.
That
Was
thing
it
a
later in the
giant.
season or was it early?
it was the 19th.
Okay.
So he probably run quite a bit off by then.
Yeah,
But boy, what a giant.
Yeah.
That rack.
That's pretty cool to share that with your old man too, right?
It's a great
Like-
story.
And I'm sure,
Great story.
you know, it would have been awesome to have your dad here too, but
Yeah.
to have him tell that story too, right?
Right.
And all these two growing, you know,
Mm-hmm.
Nick growing up underneath him, you know,
Yep.
taking him, lugging him through the woods, and then to watch your boy shoot that buck.
Perfect.
yeah, and he got to shoot it too. You know.
Yeah,
as well.
you both shot it.
And I told him, I was like, it was kind of weird because I'm like putting my tag on it, and I'm like, it's our deer. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. I had the same similar experience with my old man, and I tried to get him to shoot it, and he couldn't see it, and I ended up shooting it, but it was like just a shared experience that you have. I mean,
Yep.
there's not a lot of guys that can say that they've had that.
yeah,
You know?
it almost doesn't matter if I shoot another one. I'm kind of like,
Yeah.
that was the pinnacle. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. I'm sure it was for him.
How many
too.
points did he have? I know he was kind of non-typical, wasn't he? A little bit.
well, that's kind of there's sort of a funny story behind that. There was like 13.
Yep.
He was a 10, but he had a kicker off each base, and then he had another one in like little nubs and stuff. But we dragged the deer together for a while, and it was getting dark. And my old man's like, "What do you get?" He's like, "I'll drag. You get the truck." And I'm like, "All right." And I'm like, him and Han, he's like, "You should just go up over the top back to the truck." And I'm like, looking at Onyx, and I'm like, it's like 3 miles, and it's almost dark. And I'm like, I'll just buzz down. I'll hit the road, and I'll, hammer down the road like a ruck march. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
well, that was not a good plan. I should have mapped it out. It was like 8 miles
Long way
on the
around.
road.
Wow.
And I went like 6 or 7 and got picked up. There was these 2 guys with their wives driving out, and they were it was pretty funny. They picked me up, and they're like hesitant, but they're like, "Where are you going?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm parked up here, you know." And they're like, "Oh, you need a ride?" Or I'm like, "I mean, yeah." And they're like, "All right, is your gun unloaded?" So I get in the back with the ladies, and it's like quiet, right? And because they don't know me or anything, and the lady next to me, who's got a little dog in her lap, and she's like, they got a tree in the back that they probably illegally cut for Christmas, you know?
Yeah.
And she's like, "Oh, you have any luck?" And I was like, "Well, yeah." I'm like, "Yeah, I got one." I'm like, "I don't even know if I should say this or not." And she's like, "Oh, really? Oh, a nice one?" I'm like, "Oh, it's pretty good." She goes, "Oh, how many points?" And I see the guys are sort of like, "What's going on?" They're like listening now. And I'm like, "Oh, it's like 10 or 13 or, I don't know how." And now both of the guys are like, "Huh." And so I'm like, well, they're going to want to follow me. And they didn't.
No kidding.
They dropped me off at the truck.
That was
I
it.
couldn't believe that
Yeah.
they didn't go to see the deer, because I'm like,
Yeah.
well, they got to have a deer camp out here. But
Yeah.
they probably thought I was full of it.
Yeah.
But
Until they saw your photo.
until they saw it at the store, they're like, "Shit, we should have gone and looked at that."
Yeah, probably. Huh. Yeah, it
What
was
a
a heck of a
giant.
buck. Heck
Buck.
of a buck.
Yeah.
What a giant. Yeah, so I see, I don't know if it was the same year or one of those years you got a 200-pounder in Vermont.
It was that year.
Was it that year? That's what I thought. Yeah,
Yep.
so that's a wicked year, huh?
It was a week later. That New Hampshire one was on a Sunday, and then the following Sunday, it was right after Thanksgiving. I tracked a giant one in Vermont, and I kept running into Bunnell, and I'm like, "Get out of here. He's mine." And I just couldn't kill him. He was better. So I chased him for 2 days all over the place. And the last day, it was the last day of rifle season. I'm leaving camp, and those guys are like, "You gonna go chase that same one?" And I'm like, "Nope." I said, there was 2 other ones in there that were like right around 200. His foot was way bigger. I was like, I'm gonna follow one of those other ones. Maybe they're dumber. And I'm walking in there that morning, and I'm telling you, right where they were crossing every day, there was like it was really thick spruce, and there was where they had gone to the cut with their equipment, the little skid road. They were about to walk out in front of me. I almost killed that buck in like 5 minutes. I saw the doe turn around and go, and I'm like, oh. And I get up there, and it's one of those other 200-pounders. I'm like, man, that would have been a nice little gift. I ended up chasing him. The doe went straight across the cut. She just went down like 50 yards and went right across the wide open. The buck went all the way around it, running. Then he ran through some patch cuts, went up on the mountain, met up with some other deer. The wind was going right at him. I caught right back up to it because I was just basically running after him. He winded me again. It started snowing like crazy. He went up over the top of the mountain. The track got almost completely snowed in. I'm just like literally following a little dimple, and then it's getting fresher and fresher and fresher, and all of a sudden the doe track had come down, and he turned and followed it. And I'm like, all right, he's probably not far. And it was just like I had planned it. I mean, they walked down this skid trail and turned and went in the green. And I'm like, I'm just going to walk down the skid trail because I can see that whole other bank. And I only went like 20 yards, and a doe comes flying out of the green, lands in the trail, looks at me, turns and runs down the trail. And I just like, I had my pump with a scope on it, and I like pulled up and put the crosshairs right where she landed, and he came flying out, and I squeezed the trigger right when he stopped, and he stopped about 18 inches short of where she did. I shot right in front of him, didn't even touch him. And he kind of like looked, and I jacked another one. He took 2 bounds down the trail, and when he jumped in the woods, I shot again, and he disappeared. And when I went down there, he was just laying there, stone dead.
You got him with the second one?
Yeah. Wow. Good thing. That would have been embarrassing. But
He was a good buck, too.
Yeah, he was 205?
207.
207.
On the tail end of this.
On the last day.
Yeah.
It's a good box.
That's a really good deal.
And he was, the state aged him at 6.5. He scored like 110 and 4.8.
Yeah.
Wicked Vermont buck. 110.
Oh,
They just don't.
Yeah.
I mean, they either got it or they don't in that country. It just, I don't know, a lot of those older bucks that just don't have much for antlers.
Right.
But
So what state's your favorite to hunt?
It's kind of tough, but I'll say Maine. I don't like, if there was a few less roads, it would definitely be Maine. But or some more gates.
Yeah.
Some gates would be all right, but
yeah, they definitely would.
yeah.
Opportunities, right? There's a lot of opportunities up there.
There's
for
just
access.
a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of land. That's the,
Yep.
you know, New Hampshire's good, but New Hampshire's pretty overrun with guys now.
Yep.
I mean, most of it. There's places that aren't, but there's less snow too. So.
Yep. So you've killed 200s. You've killed a 200 in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine.
Yep.
I already know the answer to this question, but which state's the hardest to get the 200?
I mean, I'll say Vermont.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's probably more guys in New Hampshire.
Really?
I think.
Yeah, no, that's probably a true statement.
You might see a lot of trucks in Vermont, but they're not trying as hard. So if you know where there's a 200-pounder in Vermont and you can go get on him, he's probably easier to kill than the one in New Hampshire.
Oh, Joey's cringing right now.
No, he's right. But the other side of that coin is when you get late season up there, and Nick will tell you the same thing. When you get late season, there are some guys in those woods that don't screw around. There's probably some of the best hunters in the Northeast that are cruising those roads and running down bucks. Like, you better be on your A game. You can be the last one there, right? There's some very, very good hunters that are all trying to do the same exact thing.
In Vermont.
The only reason I killed that one that I just told the story about is because I beat a couple guys every day.
Yeah. Yep.
He was crossing where he shouldn't have been crossing.
Yeah.
The bigger one.
And one of those guys killed one that same year, right?
Travis did.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, but it wasn't. Yeah, because I ran into Bunnell during muzzleloader, and he goes, "Travis got your buck," and I'm like, "Really?" And he was like, "Yeah," and he showed me a picture of it. He goes, "It only weighed like 160 though," and I'm like, "That's not the buck."
That's not the buck.
And I know the buck because the next year I had a camera pretty close for moose, and I think you had a picture of him too.
Yeah, yeah,
The webbed.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's the. I missed him.
There was.
I missed
some
him.
buck there.
I missed him. He was 150 yards away, running straight up through the hardwoods, and I put it on his back and shot. And I'm like, I must have hit a sapling because I was 100. I'm like, oh, I got him.
Really?
Is he dead now, you think, or is he?
Yeah, probably. Age, probably.
Yeah. I think New Hampshire's got him, right? But it's so hard. Like, there's a lot of roads, And like Nick was saying earlier, that buck crosses the road, there's a good chance somebody else already on it.
Right.
There's a lot of roads. And if there was gated country,
Yep.
you wouldn't have nearly the pressure you would. You'd have more of an age structure than you do. There's deer there, don't get me wrong. There's good bucks there.
It's a double-edged sword because with all those roads, you have the habitat. Because where there's not roads like that, you don't have the habitat.
You mean the cuts? And
The cuts and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
That's why the roads are there. So it's like, that's the funny thing about it. It's kind of like,
Well, yeah, and with all those roads, a lot of guys will drive all the roads and get discouraged when there's a buck in that piece of woods.
True.
You're not crossing
just
the
to
road.
come out. Yep.
Yep.
So
Yeah, it can work both ways for sure. But
yeah,
it's funny. I think the guys from the Adirondacks listen to a lot of this stuff and they just don't relate because a lot of their stuff, it's just zero access.
yeah, you're walking a hiking trail or
You're hiking it like a.
yeah.
Have you thought about how many days a year you spend in the woods?
No.
No. I mean, between shed hunting's a big part of your life, right?
Yeah.
As
So-
many as you can.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
does it plays into your success, right? As
Oh,
far
yeah.
as finding spots and
Yeah, especially the older I've gotten, the wiser I've gotten, and I'm like paying attention. I don't have to look for an antler with the dog, so I'm like looking for buck sign and
Right.
like, thanks for the antler, bud. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
you cover some ground.
yeah, yeah,
That's the 11 Bravo in you, right?
yeah, yeah. I found sheds at the sniper comp in Arkansas. We're like in the competition, doing well, and we're on the stock lane, and I'm like sneaking sideways to go grab this shed in a ghillie suit, like stay right there. I'm like shimmy over, grab this 5-point shed, shimmy back.
That's funny.
That's cool.
Yeah, then the other guys are like, of course, a lot of them are from down south, and there's a lot of deer. So I've got a 5-point shed like laying on my bunk, and they're like, "What do you keep that thing for?" And I'm like, "Dude, it's a freaking deer antler. Like, what do you got? You don't leave them. What do you?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
They thought I was nuts, but
Yeah.
Did you ever get deployed? Did you go over?
no,
You didn't.
no. I went to Macedonia for a NATO. I can't remember what they called it. It was like 13 countries. That was fun. It was an eye opener to see how bad some of the other militaries are.
Really?
Like our allies, you know, we would all do like they would have an exercise and it would be like, you're going to clear this village or whatever, right?
Right.
Clear all the buildings and stuff. And they would always have us go first. And I'm like, how come we're always going first? But then you realize they don't have a clue what they're doing. They would literally watch you go, and then they would do even if you screwed it up, they would do exactly what you did. Because they're like, that's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Like,
Really?
no, guys.
Just no training or what?
Yeah, they don't have any money, and they just
Yeah.
like it was in Macedonia. The Macedonians were like, it was just like dudes with guns, you know.
Yeah.
Like,
Family guys that got
Yeah.
called in or something.
yeah, I
Wow.
was trying to. It was hard, but I was trying to talk to them. I was like, "Do you guys hunt? Like, do?" And they're like, "Yeah, we have the stag." I don't know if they're like red stag or if they just call them stag, and I don't know what kind of deer they are, but
So
Yeah.
you're talking about shooting in Arkansas. That's something we have in common. We've both done. You saw some shooters there.
oh yeah.
Like, tell these guys a little bit about that. I mean,
So I did the only WPW I did was for the sniper comp.
Now what's
I was-
that? WPW.
Winston P. Wilson.
Okay.
It's like a national. It's where everybody goes, right? So
It's like a training center.
no, it's like a competition.
Oh, competition.
So,
Okay.
so the sniper school is at Camp Robinson,
Okay.
and then you also have Fort Chaffee. So you're here for half the time, then you go over here because there's different stuff at both places. But they have competition. They have WPW, and there's like a rifle match and pistol and machine gun, but there's a special one. It's at a different time, just for the sniper competition, and you do a ruck and throw your crap on the ground, do an obstacle course, keep going, shoot at a target, you know, all kinds of stuff. There's a unknown distance range. You have to just run up. You have no idea what's there. You run up there and you can't see the range. And then each team, you go up and you shoot, and then you go somewhere else. So you're not talking at all to the other teams. And there'd be like one target, and they're like, here's 2 bullets. And if you hit it the first shot, you get this many points. And if you hit it the second shot, so we totally. So like I pulled a muscle in my back on the ruck, and then the next event, was to carry these. I don't go to the gym, but what are those? The big
Kettlebells?
Yeah, kettlebells. You had to carry 2 of those up into a tower and a dummy, like a crash dummy,
Right.
which is
Mannequin.
heavy. Yeah, it's freaking 180 pounds or something,
Yeah.
Right.
I'm not that big. So we had to carry this up in there, and then we had to lay across this platform up in there and shoot. And, like, I totally tore the muscle that goes from my shoulder blade, like, to your back, So I was not a happy camper. And we got 0 points on that match. And we had already won 2 of the matches. And so we ended up, the whole comp, we ended up taking, like, 7th out of 20 something.
Yeah.
But that's the whole country. So we were still like, all right, there's some.
I remember shooting the IC match there, and there'll be 1,500 shooters, and you get up there, and I remember shooting like in 120th place or something one year. But there's guys that got up there that were lights out.
Oh yeah.
Open sights, 300 meters. You're running through some of this.
300 meters. What's that, like 900 yards?
No, it's 330 yards.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I was way off.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
I was thinking the
still.
other way around. I was thinking yards to feet. Okay.
Yeah.
But you got moving targets, snap
Yeah.
targets, and
Yeah.
stuff. It plays into the hunting though,
Oh,
because
yeah.
this shooting is real world.
Yeah. It's so like the first match when we were there, it was I don't know, they come up with little names for them or whatever, but it was pop up targets, and they don't last long.
No.
Normally, like if you would do like your rifle qualification just for your regular training, it pops up and it's 4 or 5 seconds?
Yeah.
Right. This at the comp, it'd be like 2 maybe.
Two.
So like the thing pops up, you got to get your red dot on it or an ACOG, which is a Trigicon, right?
Yeah.
You like got to get on it and shoot. You don't. And they were like 50 to 300 meters, and we didn't miss a one. Like we just were nailing them. And some of these guys, you could see like they could, probably hit you at 1,000 meters, but they could not get on that target that quick.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't even say that because now Glenn's going to want me to use a red dot. But yeah, it was an eye opener. The moving targets just shows you how far you have to lead stuff.
Yep.
Because so the moving targets, like if you go to sniper school, it's actually there's a guy holding, like one of your buddies is holding a stick, and he's in the pit, so he's safe, and he's just walking. And so you kind of have to like learn to walk at a certain pace and smooth, right? So there's not like a pause between. And, we would shoot movers at 1,200 meters. Yeah, you have to know how far to lead.
Wow.
We would shoot them at night, and you only have to shoot a certain distance to qualify for movers. But like,
let's just say 500 meters, and there's this guy moving behind that bunker. Like, how far do you think you have to lead? I mean, I won't hold you to it, but
at 500 with like a 308 or a 300 Win Mag,
you lead him like 5 feet or something.
No. At 500, you're leading him like 10 inches,
really?
Maybe.
Yeah.
And you might miss the lead edge actually, but
yeah,
it depends on the wind too. That's the problem. If the wind is, going this way, and if he's walking left to right and the wind is blowing right to left,
That's a full value.
yeah,
yeah.
So
it's harder. It's way harder for the rifle shooters with the iron sights.
Yeah.
I bet.
Because they'll mark it. Like with a sniper rifle, they'll mark it, and you're looking through a scope, so you're like, all right, I barely hit him, so I got to lead more.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's wild.
That's pretty cool.
That sounds fun though.
Yeah.
It does.
Oh,
I
yeah.
bet that helped with shooting, tracking.
Oh,
Helped a lot.
I have to do some more
Yeah, it's
deer tracking shooting this summer because
Yeah.
the people who only shoot a perfect shot at a standing deer. That's what I was trying to get into.
oh yeah,
This is it's just instinctive after a while.
yeah. It's not you're not in a box blind in Illinois.
Yeah.
They're usually running.
They're usually running.
Yeah.
Usually
through
a
some
pretty good clip.
nasty
or
shit.
or Timmy would want me to throw this in there, or they just walk back to Nick and he shoots them at 20 yards.
Well, remember how you said you were doing your loops and it was like, the fourth, was the fourth
It was a
leaf,
four-leaf
clover.
clover. Yeah. So after I shoot that buck, he's like, well, you can come with me now video. And since you don't have a tag. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And we went into a place, and there was some huge bucks. He was blown away. He was like, I've never seen, in this part of the state, he was like, I've never seen buck tracks that many different ones. And we got on one, and he was steaming fresh. And he was like, hey, do that. It was like new. And he's like, do that thing you do where they come back. He's like, I don't want to go up this mountain.
Yeah. Let me just pull this horseshoe out and give it to you, Timmy.
Yeah.
It was, I mean, we had a blast. And the good thing about having, two guys, one guy with a gun and one with a camera that both want to just go hard till dark. Like where we ended up going with that buck, if you were alone, it would be way easier to turn around. But there was times when we were like, let's just go.
You're
like,
pushing each other.
We'll just go. Yeah. I mean, he ended up going. It was we were grabbing trees and stuff, climbing up this thing. And we're like, what is he doing all by himself? Yep. And he got up there, and it was way up high. And it just opened up. It was all like mossy, like probably wild blueberries and crap. I don't know. But we got up there, and there's deer tracks and there's other buck tracks. So there was a hot doe up there. We think we ended up on a different buck because they had chased all around, and we're like, oh yeah, that's him going out. And we followed him, and there was probably a half an hour left before dark, and we're like 3 miles from the truck. And we're like, well, probably ought to bail back down into this basin and start going. And we're on a moose trail, and those two bucks come out in the trail together.
No kidding.
Like 5 feet apart. They both had walked out, crossed back the moose trail, and then went down over this other side. And I'm like, all right. So there was two like that right here. On the way out in the dark with headlamps, we walked past another one that's headed down.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, man, we're coming back here tomorrow.
Yeah.
We go in there the next day, there's not a fresh deer track to be found.
Must have been a real pretty doe up in there.
Yeah.
Something.
But
that's crazy.
Huh.
Find out what's in there this year.
With tracking, it's getting on the right one. Sometimes you zig and they zag, and you just never have them come back at you, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's where you are.
Yeah.
Where you catch them.
Yep.
That was a great piece of woods. We thought we were going to catch him a bunch, but he just never stopped.
He was fresh right in front of you the whole time. He just kept moving.
He was pretty fresh.
Yeah.
He was probably only a couple hours old when we got in there, but he was just.
Did you guys try and get on any of them the next day, or?
Yeah, the next day we made a huge loop in that basin.
They were gone.
We thought about trying to come in the other way, but neither one of us had been in that way. And we're like, well, they might have just pitched over and come right back, So we're like, well, we'll go in the way we came out and go higher in that basin. And we made a huge loop and didn't find anything. We found a giant old green moose antler on the steepest, rockiest. Like, it's no wonder nobody ever found the thing.
Yeah.
It looks like you were hunting for sheep or something.
Right.
I couldn't believe Timmy walked right over it. It was sticking. I saw the brow sticking out of the snow, and I was like, psh. I'm like, you don't want that? And he looked down. He's like, oh yeah. And when he grabbed, I had no idea. I thought it was just a little. He grabbed it and pulled it out. I'm like, holy cow! I mean, it was big enough where you'd probably take it out.
Yeah.
Even for how old it was.
It's pretty cool. I'm sure you've done it many times with following bucks, and then all of a sudden you're like, I've had one that stepped over an antler, like a little bit sticking up, stepped over it. I was like, oh, no shit, pick that up. And there's Johnny's. You wonder what he thinks when he sees it. And there's Johnny's antler.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Huh. So after you shot those 2 bucks, you hunt Vermont at all?
This year, I did. I'm trying to think. I went with Timmy some, running camera. The snow got a little, and then I didn't really even bother. I'm trying to think. It was like the last day of muzzleloader. It rained, softened things up. I got on a pretty good one.
Yeah, it went to shit is what it did.
Yeah,
it was pretty crunchy. Got cold. Muzzleloader. Yeah.
I went up on a mountain that
Yeah.
and the buck went down. I went up, found a good buck. He went down, crossed the snowmobile trail. Went up the next one, heading north. I'm pretty sure he went to Canada. I mean, he was just like heading for Canada, and found a giant signpost in there. He didn't go to it, but he walked like 20 yards from it. So on the way out, I went back, checked it out, and
that's cool.
I ran into a couple other guys in there, but he was just headed, and it was so, everything was so wet, and the snow was just so soaked. Like, I was getting farther behind him from looking at the track. You know, I'm like, I'm not even, it doesn't even look the same. Like, it's melting so fast, I can't even, and I was like running. I'm like, it's the last day. I just got to get caught up to him. But
it was that way the last day of rifle season up there too. Same thing, just pouring rain. And I swore I was going to catch that buck, and he'd get a little bit further, and he still looked like he was 300 pounds. He'd go a little bit further, and he's still 300. And by the time he got down low, he was gone, just bare ground.
Yeah.
Walked right into it. But
yeah, I got on a decent one, I think, during rifle, but he wasn't. I ended up leaving it. He went through some hardwood, soft maple whips and stuff, and I'm like, man, he doesn't have much for antlers. He had a pretty good track, and there was a real big one. I got cut off on that right off I knew I was gonna, but I was like, I gotta follow him. And he went down his handrail on the road, and I'm like, don't do it. Don't cross the road. And then a boot track came up and took it. He was a good one. He had come down with some does, and he rubbed a couple of trees. I could see the road down below. I didn't even pick him up from the truck. I drove to the end of the road, parked at a landing, and turned up, and they had come down. But I didn't even try for him during muzzleloader. I probably should have gone back, but there was so many guys. I'm like, I just got to try to find a easier spot. But
it can be tough up there, man. There's a lot of people. Too many.
I went up for the first time this year, and I couldn't believe the trucks up there. It's loaded with guys.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
Yeah, I tried to get away from everybody. One day I went and signed a jar just for...
just cause.
Yeah, right.
I've never even signed one before, but I'm like reading through it like, oh, so-and-so was here shed hunting. And this guy was here in November. And
I've done that. That's cool.
Yeah.
I wish there was a way that you could find where more of those things are, like coordinates or pins or something, right?
Yeah.
There's a pile.
The geocaches.
Geocache.
Yeah, there's a pile of them around, but
yeah.
they're pretty tough to find,
Yeah.
right? Like you look at
They're
a lot
like
of
in
those
the middle
ones,
of nowhere.
Yeah, the ones that are PVC that are strapped onto the tree, you know, they're covered in moss. They might just as well look like a branch, right? They're pretty tough to find.
A lot of the ones in New Hampshire have little signs,
Yeah.
like little wooden signs. But
The first one I ever found was a glass peanut butter jar.
Yeah.
With a little pad in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
People were up there snowshoeing and cross-country skiing, and I'm like, wow.
That's cool.
They were pretty hardy.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was up on this mountain over in New Hampshire, and I was up on top, and I was with a buddy. I don't even know what we were doing. I think we were just hiking in the summertime and like off trail. And I come to this spot. It's all mossy and nice, and there was a couple rocks. And I was like, oh, look at that. Little glass jar in there. I pull it out, and it was a geocache.
Yep.
And Charlie Foote was on it.
Yep.
I thought that was cool.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat.
I've come across a few of his.
Yeah. It was in the middle of nowhere.
Yep.
It's like, what? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
that one that I signed, Will Stats had signed it about 380 times. It was like everything was Will. I'm like... He's just talking to himself at this point. Like, nobody else has signed it. So I signed it, and I was like, I'll be nice. And I'm like, saw 3 good bulls.
Yeah.
I even put my name. I was like, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
If you want to hike up here,
Yeah, more
you're
power to you.
You're going to
for
earn
you.
it. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. So, what would be some advice that you would give to guys that are just getting into tracking?
Time.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Time.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you got a regular job and you get 2 weeks a year, the wives aren't going to like this, but don't go on vacation with the wife. Save the 2 weeks and
Yeah.
go in November, you know.
Yep.
Probably the last 2 weeks in November, try to have snow. I mean, it's a lot of it is time.
Yep.
You know, obviously, because the more days you're in the woods, the more, you know, you might just get lucky and bump into a buck, but also you're learning every day too. So, yeah, time. And
What about picking a spot? And I'm not talking specific. I'm just talking general area. What are you looking for?
so, yeah, it's tough because, like, I grew up hunting the Adirondacks. There was no cuts. They can be anywhere.
Right.
You know what I mean? The good part about the Adirondacks, I'm going to, like, just chuck it right under the bus. You're not going to see the people. Like, if you want to not see people when you're tracking deer, go to the Adirondacks. it's steep and there's no roads. So 3 to 4 miles into a basin is pretty normal, you know? So you might have 8 miles. I mean, you might walk in somewhere and burn a whole day and never see a buck track. I prefer the cuts because I like looking at moose. So if I'm not seeing deer, at least maybe I'm seeing bulls and I can stay a little occupied.
And would you agree that there's more deer in the areas that there's cuts?
There's places where it's not cut, where there's a lot of deer, you know, swamps and stuff. And like there's places in the Adirondacks where there's no cuts and
there's deer.
There's a lot of deer. But I would say there's, you know, in general, it's probably easier to find deer in Maine where it's cut versus the Adirondacks where it's not cut.
Right.
But
generally,
it might not be a place where you want to hunt because there might be, you know, checkerboard of roads and there's a lot of deer. But
I think it's easier tracking in those areas where there's no cuts.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah, I mean, the woods are so much more wide
they
open.
lay out pretty.
The age structure of it is.
Yeah. Most of the, you know, like what Nick's hunting, most of it's like this. You know what I
that's
mean?
tough. Yeah.
40, 50 yards is probably your longest shot. Most of it, like he said, is 20 yards. You know, you better be on your game.
The bad part is, so like that's why I hunt with a peep. But the bad part is a couple of years ago in New Hampshire, you know, you have the exact opposite. Because they cut and because it's so thick, you also have wide open spots. And I had a buck at like 150 yards broadside, and I misfired, which sucked, and that kind of threw me off a little bit. And it was so cold that he turned and looked right at me from 150 yards away. It was like I think it was like the day after Thanksgiving. It was the coldest I'd ever hunted. I walked a half mile in, turned around and walked back to the truck and finished my coffee and sat in the truck. I was like, it is, because there was nobody parked there. I'm like, I'm going to let it get warm.
Yeah.
And it worked out too, because I bet I would have never even seen that deer. I walked back in, got on his track. I didn't go a half mile, and he's out in front of me walking broadside. Heavy, dark rack. I don't think he had much for tines, but he was heavy, big deer. Broadside. I'm like, got the bead on him. 150, like we were just talking with open sights. Guys would have problems, but I had a fire sight, fiber optic. Never again.
Really?
No way.
Just took
it's
up
too
the
big.
entire deer.
They're too big. I got this tip from Timmy Bolduc. You get the brass bead. Those newer beads suck. They're junk. You get the old school brass bead, and you take a file and file that thing down and make it even smaller than it was. That I put that fiber optic bead on that buck, and I probably would have got him if the first shot would have gone off, but I squeezed and it went click, and there's no wind, freezing cold, and that buck just turned and looked right at me, and I'm like, ah, crap. So I'm like, well, I just got to jack one in there, and he's going to know if something's up, but I'll have time to squeeze. So I jack one in there, and I knew as I'm squeezing, my bead was it was sinking, and I knew. I was like, I shot right under him, and he took off running. I shot again, but if I'd had a scope, I probably would have got him with the second shot. But those two this year with a scope, even on one power, I might have been like, whoa, you know.
Right
so
there.
Yep.
If my eyes are good, I'm sticking with a peep.
Yeah.
As soon as they start to go, I'm switching.
Wonder why they don't put the brass bead on the Woodman, because they got a fiber on the Woodman.
But it's way smaller.
Is it? Yeah.
Way
I have a fire sight on my pump that I have a peep on, and
the Williams fire sight.
Yep.
Yeah. Hold your Woodman next to your.
It's smaller.
Oh, it's tiny. That's what I use. I have the peep on my Patriot, and
I got a buddy. Actually, give him a little shout out, Leo Audie. He's hunted up in Maine a lot, and he had a 308 Police edition. And I'm telling you, the bead on the end of that thing was the size of your pinky.
Holy smokes.
And our boy was killing bucks with that thing. He killed a lot of bucks with
it.
it.
Yeah, it's like square.
Yeah, I'm like, dude, how are you killing deer with this thing? You know, it's like you pull it up and cover a pumpkin at 20 yards. I'm like, holy crap.
Yeah.
You kill him with it.
I had one of those fire sights, and I took it out. So it was a hole to a hole.
Yeah.
I just can't hit the broadside of a barn with a peep gun. Just not for me.
Yeah. Everybody's different, right?
Yep. I swear to God, like, when I get them, when they're close and I get them, I have no idea where that bead was.
Yeah.
It's like I'm shooting a shotgun. I'm just like, but
instinctive.
I will empty that gun too. Like,
Yeah.
I've had my dad's buddies used to give me some hell in the Adirondacks. They're like, I thought you used a pump. And I'm like, I do. They're like, sounded like an automatic. They're like, pow, 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 pow. And I'm like, yeah, just keep pulling the trigger.
And
like
stuff slows right down too, though, doesn't it? When you're shooting out a buck, it does. Oh my God, I rip. Yeah, it's like the heart's doing about 200 beats per minute. And
sometimes people have too much time. That throws them too.
Does it? Yeah.
They have too much time to think about it.
Yeah,
that
that's
comes back
true.
to the moving target, instinctive. You're just putting it on it, and you're getting
just
it.
Pull the trigger.
Yep.
And see, that's why I like bow hunting so much, because when you hear them coming or when you see them coming when you're bow hunting, you get so worked up because it's like you have that huge buildup.
Absolutely.
You
You've
know?
got the whole nerve factor.
Oh my gosh! Like trying to remember how to breathe. You know, deer's coming in.
Oh, I swear, out of all the stories that I've heard from people, because the last bunch of years I've talked to a lot of people, more people than I had ever before, and everybody wants to tell you their story about the biggest buck that they missed, and it's almost always like they see the buck standing there or he's laying there, and they're just looking at him for too long, and then I'm like, you just got to shoot.
Just pull up and shoot.
Don't
I hate
think
to
about
say
it,
it, but
just
if you
do it.
see antlers and a butt, shoot him in the hip. Like,
get one into him, you'll finish him off.
Don't let him lay there after, but like,
get him. Yeah.
if you can hit him somewhere where he's not going to move after.
That goes back to like what you do. You do the same thing I do. When you shoot, you take off.
Yeah.
You don't screw around.
I'm guilty.
What?
See,
I'm absolutely running.
Yeah, same thing. If it's bare ground, it's a different thing, right? Like you got to be a little bit smarter about it. You might run a little ways, try and get another one into him or whatever. But when it's bare ground, you definitely, you got to keep your head on a swivel in that sense. But when there's snow on the ground,
see, I'm like your dad. When I shoot, I just like plop down for a few minutes, and I'm like, oh, okay, like because I don't know why. I guess my experience is I've seen a bunch come back that I've blown out because like I shoot and they didn't know where I was coming or what it was, and they kind of like ran off, and then I go running up there and he was coming back up over the hill, and So I think just experiences like that. And then another thing is I've also hit him, and it was like, he probably would have died if I gave him another 2 or 3 minutes. And then he gets up and runs down over a freaking mountainside. So I guess it's just a combination of my experiences. My instinct is to just, after I pull the trigger, if they disappear, I just bloop.
Yeah, a lot of the times when you just run just that little bit, it opens up a whole nother hole maybe that you can shoot them again in, right? I mean, we've all been doing it long enough. You move 6 inches, you can see 6 more feet,
Well, I don't have legs like you, Joey. I can't run like that. Snow gets up over my ankles, and that's I can't run like you.
Oh man.
That's I know Timmy and I did a seminar in Concord. What's that? The Trinity show, I think. Yeah. And he, it was his seminar that he had been doing, and that came up, and he's like, I start creeping, and and he was like, you do the same thing probably, and I was like, no, I run, and because I've found out, like you said, your experience, like a lot of times you shoot and they don't know what the heck just happened, and they'll stop.
Right.
So if you just stood there, you wouldn't be able to see him, but if he's running, he doesn't know you're running. He's not looking behind him like this. Yeah. So if you run over there and just stop, a lot of times you'll see them stop, or you'll get over there and they'll be standing down there like, what's going on? Especially like a gut shot deer or liver, they'll run a little bit and stop a lot of times. And yeah.
If you can get another one, get another one into them.
Even when you jump them and you hear them go, like there's a lot of times and a lot of situations where if it's thick enough, I will run. Like I will run at least. Maybe that drops off or something. I'll at least run to that to try and just get a little bit better vantage point. I mean, more often than not, if he doesn't know what you are, you're just gonna run a little ways and he's gonna stop, turn around and look.
The person that I know that does that the most is Corey.
Yep.
Just running and blowing and grunting. He used to do that all the time. Just make as much noise as he could make.
Yep. Throw the buck at him.
And it worked.
Yep.
It worked. Yep. I know my dad's buddy used to flip his grunt tube around and blow into the back of it to sound like a deer blowing.
Yeah.
And he had deer in the Adirondacks, like nice mature bucks, walk right back to him, like stomping and looking and shoot him right in the chest,
Yep. So the calling thing, when you're tracking a buck, will you make a sound? Will you grunt? Will you bleat? Will you do any of that, or do you not want that buck to know that you're there?
If I think they're right there chasing around doing stuff and it's thick, I might do it. But
most of the time,
I don't even want to carry a grunt.
What about if it's really crunchy?
If it's really crunchy, I just walk.
Yeah. So no call when it's crunchy.
Yep. I just like if it's super crunchy, I might bring a grunt tube, and I might like the first guy that I guided for deer up in Jackman. The guy couldn't walk that far. He had some medical stuff going on, and he was fine. He could hike, but he just couldn't go like we can go. And Hal was like, there's a spot over here you should go try. And I don't think anybody's been in there. And I'm like, all right. And it had gotten crunchy. So it was like this raspberry road on the way in there. And it's, the briars are dragging on you. And there's like 180, 200, 220 buck tracks. They're all old, just back and forth. And there's a little finger along this old road. And there's a big swamp over here. We're walking in there, and I'm just like doing a grunt every once in a while. We get to the landing, and there's a buck track going up through. And I mean, for two guys, the amount of crunch that there was, it was like, and I would grunt. I'd take like 10 steps and grunt, but I wouldn't wait. And I would just go, and all of a sudden, this buck jumps up, and I didn't know it was a buck then, but I could see a deer's body. It goes across, and he saw antlers and shot it. And it was 195, or, it was all busted up. This year, we were doing the same exact thing, or last year, I guided a guy on the same road. Walking in there, I had rattling antlers. It was like dry, frozen, just crappy. Walking in there, I would just stop and bang the antlers together for a second and then walk. And he was like, "You don't think we should stand here?" And I was like, "Honestly, I don't think we're going to call in a buck with rattling antlers."
Yeah.
People do it all the time, especially up there. I don't know what is going on up there, but... And next thing you know, there's a buck walking. He's in the road walking at us. And he sees me when I see him. And we ended up getting, he stopped. He jumped in the woods, and I blew at him with my mouth. And I started rattling the antlers, which seems kind of goofy when they know you're a person.
Right.
But he just stood there. He didn't go anywhere. And the guy got a shot, but I think he hit. There was a blowdown, and I think he might have nicked the blowdown. But
yeah, that's interesting, the rattling in the North Country. I've heard a theory. I can't remember who said it, but that it works even better in the North Country because they'd never hear it. But getting one to hear it, that's the trick.
Yeah.
So, but that's kind of the theory I've heard, and I can't remember who that was.
I think you got a lot more mature bucks up there that actually fight too, right? You come back here and it's like rattling chopsticks together.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But think about it in like the Midwest or like a highly pressured area. Everybody's banging antlers together. So they're probably a little more wary of those, guys rattling. Whereas if you're in northern Maine or something and a buck's only a few hundred yards away and he hears you antlers smashing together, you're probably going to come check it out.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting, though, that, crunchy days, I do the same thing. I don't just walk a few feet and then stop and listen. I pretty much will just line out, almost move as fast as I can move, and just... You're hearing shot because it's so crunchy. Just go with your eyes, right? And hope that we've all seen it before when you're riding a lawnmower, let's say, and the deer comes out or the deer, is just comfortable because it can hear the noise and keep an eye on you. And it's the same thing in the woods when it's crunchy. If you can spot that deer before he really gets nervous, he hears you. He hears you coming. Here's something coming. It could be a moose, could be whatever. Just gives you long enough time that maybe you can identify him and sink one into him. If you're poking, man, nothing's going to alert him more than spelling I'm a predator by just taking 3 steps and stopping.
Exactly.
Taking 3 steps and stopping, right?
Yep.
And you better get him on that first go around with the crunchy snow.
Yeah.
I've been there though. You jump them on the crunchy snow and just be like, well, what are you going to do? I mean, it's either leave them and go to a new area, but at least there's one in front of you. Maybe they'll get screwed up with a doe or something, but boy, they're pretty hockey when they know you're behind them with crunchy snow.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I like, as a kid watching the Benoit videos, that was the biggest thing I took out of all those videos was Lanny being like, you just crunch up on him. Not too fast, not too slow, just a steady pace. And I was like, what? What is he talking about?
Yeah.
And then I've done it now, and I'm like, oh yeah, you just walk.
You just walk up to them.
And a lot of times they're like, what's that coming? You know, and you're like, hi.
Yeah.
You know, I always tell people are like, man, it's so hard. And I'm like, it's not easy.
Right.
But like, you're sort of overthinking it because a deer doesn't know what a rifle is.
Right.
Like a coyote has to catch them, right? A wolf has to catch them. Bobcat has to catch them. We just have to see them.
Yep.
That's how bad we are, really.
Yeah, right. We're not the greatest predators. We got a big brain. That's about it.
I mean, it's a good thing we invented rifles. But.
Yeah, right. I think the hardest part of tracking is the physical aspect. I think that separates most deer guys is, okay, can you go do 12 miles and then the next day do 10 and the next day do 8 and still be on your game? Where it's, I feel that separates a lot of people.
You got to be in shape. There's not a lot of guys that can go, let's say, 3 days in a row and do 10, 15 miles a day.
Yeah, and you got to have it up here.
You might be able to do it twice, but
right.
chances of you doing it 3,
right?
There's not a lot of guys that can do it.
And you can call it dumb or tough, but you got to have that thing.
Determination.
Timmy calls it grit, right?
Yeah.
You got to have that thing where it's like, well, this is going to suck, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
On the second and third day, you can't be looking at the ground and feeling depressed.
Right.
And, I'm not seeing any deer.
And what I've noticed, too, is a lot of military guys are great trackers because I think you guys embrace the suck, right? That's like kind of the term for the military.
Yeah.
One of them is like, you guys know what it's like to be tired and, put through the ringer. And like, I think Brad Wiley, he's a New Hampshire guy. He was,
I think he was an MP or something.
Right. Yeah. It just seems like those guys make great trackers because
they don't quit.
They don't quit.
And I mean, like there's, basic training and then, depending on what you do, it can be different or whatever. But even for the most basic, they put a lot of heavy stuff in a pack, and you carry it down the road. And there's no prize at the end. There's not a deer waiting at the end.
Yeah.
You just carry an 80-pound pack for 12 miles for fun.
Yeah,
it's pure work ethic.
Yeah, and you're getting screamed at the whole time, and it's not a comfortable pack.
It's fun.
Yeah,
right. It must really put things in perspective for you guys, because like when you get out, everything must be kind of easy, right? Like normal stuff is easier than going through that.
Fun stuff is,
Yeah.
It's like if there's any motivation behind it at all, it's...
Yeah. You don't have that mental hang up that I think a lot of people do just because.
Well, there's some people that show up and you can tell it's a lot for them.
Really?
It overwhelms them. And then, I thought it was great. I didn't think basic training was hard at all. I mean, growing up in my household, it was pretty typical,
Yeah.
Discipline, hard work, and get up early.
You sleep good at night.
You sleep good at night.
Yep.
But
all those things that you just mentioned, John, right? That is what leads to success in the tracking world.
Absolutely.
Right? Discipline, getting up early, getting after it day after day, work ethic,
Yep.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Well, it's been a good podcast.
Yeah, this was great.
Thanks for coming
We'll have
on,
to get
Nick.
you back on.
Yeah.
Yeah, good times.
Yeah. Where can people find you?
Facebook, Instagram.
Yep.
Instagram is so easy that I've just been on it. You know? I don't know. I don't share too much, but
What about YouTube? You have a YouTube now too, right?
I do have a YouTube, but
What's
I don't have it figured out. So there's
Well, you're just starting it. That's the way it's supposed to be.
I sort of started and stopped. I haven't posted anything in a while, but
What's the name on the YouTube?
you probably know more. It might be my name.
Is it Nick?
It's probably just my name. It's probably just Nick Campagna. That's what my Instagram is, and
Gotcha.
I think I made them the same, so
You'll have to
easier,
start filming some more. Put up some
yeah,
hunts.
I saw the Stagger guys made a little backpack.
Yep.
I don't like backpacks, but might get some stuff with a GoPro.
I think that's the way to go if you're going to do it.
I think
Tracking.
a camera guy is the way to go.
Well-
Personally, I hate the over-the-shoulder. This is not going to be a popular opinion. I think the over-the-shoulder GoPro footage sucks.
How about on the head?
No, it sucks.
That's what I do.
GoPros suck. You don't I want to see the deer.
Yeah.
Right.
Nobody did what the Benoits did. They did it. Tom Blaze did it.
Yeah.
If you could do that again now, you would have something.
Yep.
If times were the same, right? In the areas that they did it.
We just all go to Ontario and video.
Oh,
Yeah.
You could dominate with it. You know what I mean?
You'd have to bring, what you do is you'd bring a bunch of your buddies that hadn't shot many deer.
Yeah.
And you just wait for them to tag out real quick and then be like, all right, come on, grab a camera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd all have camera guys.
Brooke's going to capture some tracking video this fall. So
cool.
Yeah. No, I would agree with you, Nick. The cinematic part of it too, right? Like there's just that much better. It's that much better.
Yeah. There's times like if you had the GoPro footage to just like see your head and you pulling up the gun, I don't want to see that when you shoot though. I feel like that would be a cool thing to have in, but also if I have a camera guy, I'm not wearing the GoPro. So love-hate relationship with the video part, you know.
It was tough for me last year because last year was the first time I'd ever done it with a GoPro, and I hate wearing a backpack. It makes my back sweat. I've always been a fanny pack guy. That's just small little fanny pack. Don't hardly carry anything in it other than what you need, right? And then to wear that backpack, it makes your back sweat. And I'm not going slow, right? So you're going to sweat. Yeah.
I heard there was like almost like a bino harness thing, and it could sit on your shoulder, but that thing would it would get caught, and it would end up behind you, or
I wear it right on my head.
Yeah,
I just have a strap. I put it right on my head. That's what I've always.
You don't catch it on stuff.
I mean, I'm used to it. I've done it for like 4 years now, but the GoPros are getting pretty good. Like they shoot 4K 60, and I can zoom in like pretty far, and you can see the deer when you shoot it. You know.
I have an 8, and I used it a little bit for shed hunting. That thing would die. The battery would be dead in like 25 minutes.
Right. They're getting better.
Really?
Yeah. I have the 10. You guys both have the 10. The 10s are good. And the 11s apparently are, top notch as well. But the batteries are getting better. The sensors are getting better. Like it's better. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's all about what you can do. If you can have a cameraman, I think that's definitely great. And you have to have good chemistry with a cameraman, which I think that's not thought of a lot.
It's got to be a hunter behind you.
It's got to be a hunter. It's got to be a tracker. A lot of times, somebody. It's like you're double teaming, but one guy's got a camera instead of a rifle.
And sometimes two guys are far better than. 4 eyes are better than 2.
Yeah,
the conditions call for it, boy. That's a deadly situation.
Yeah,
you're
right.
I've never had more fun. I've been with other people. I've guided guys, and I've been with other people. Other than my dad, I've never had as much fun as I had with Timmy last year when I had the camera.
Yeah,
because just also being a tracker, like I knew what to video.
Yep.
Like we didn't talk about videoing at all. Yep. We were joking around the whole day, laughing, like taking little breaks, and that buck was in trouble.
Yeah.
Because like I realized that I was videoing and I'm able to look for the deer, and I would just keep it zoomed out enough where you could see him.
Yep.
And if the buck was to jump up, I could just I'm like, I probably can't see him with my eyes on the screen, but I know he's in there. So, yeah.
What are you guys going to do with that footage?
We don't have it anymore.
It's gone? Oh, it's gone?
That's a bummer.
Yeah, it went back with the camera. So.
Oh, gotcha. I didn't know it wasn't your camera.
Yeah, okay. It was a XA11 or something.
Yeah.
So it was a mirrorless, or like a.
No, it was like a
handy
the nice,
cam?
the nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was good. It had a lot of buttons that I didn't know what they did.
Yeah.
So I took a picture of it when they gave it to us.
Yeah.
And they were like, okay, this is where the settings need to be. And there was only one setting that we would have wanted to change. So we had it in like a whisper mode for when we were hunting.
Yep.
And they're like, if you get something or whatever, you want to change it to this mode to make the audio. Because if you had it in whisper mode, then you start talking loud, it would be kind of.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about it, but
right.
It was for how Timmy and I don't know anything about videoing. They handed a video camera. I hit record, got a bunch of clips. We watched it on the TV at camp, and the clips were pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, even the days you don't kill, those are great videos.
Yeah.
I like to watch them, especially you get a guy that knows what he's doing, and you're picking up on stuff that he's talking about or doing, because you're not always killing a buck.
Yeah.
But
most of the time you're not.
Most of the time you're not. Anything else, guys? This is great. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for joining, Nick.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, boys. See you on the next one.